we've all played with them at one point, or at least know what they are. Small plastic bricks that you can put together or take apart and be creative with so you can make something bigger and better. PC building, basically the adult version of Legos in the sense that you can also get creative with it and because you shouldn't eat your components. There are many reasons why you should build a PC, according to Mark Kernan in his article that he wrote last year. One being it is because it is a cheaper alternative to buying a pre-built PC, and because after building PCs for about 5 years, 4 years, I just think that it's pretty fun because, like I said, it's the adult version of Legos. And there are several factors that go into planning out a PC, as Ian Sinclair has stated in his book called How to Build and Upgrade Your Own PC. And this is whether you want to make it for like a home theater, whether it's for office use, whether you want to make a gaming PC, and also your budget is an important factor in which parts you can plan out. So these are all the parts that you would need in building a PC. You have the CPU, or the central processing unit. A cooler is pretty important because if your CPU doesn't have a cooler, then your PC would probably catch on fire, and that's not as good of an aesthetic as you would think it'd be. You have the motherboard that allows all the parts to be connected, the RAM or the memory that allows applications to be opened. The GPU is the graphics processing unit, which allows you to show images on your monitor. You have the case, which is technically optional unless you want all your parts to be exposed. You have the hard drive, which allows you to store your operating system and all your files. The power supply, pretty self-explanatory, powers everything up. And you have the monitor and peripherals, which allows you to actually interact with your computer. So the first step in creating a PC is installing the CPU. Oh yeah, also I forgot to mention that there are different ways that you can actually, there's no specific order you can assemble your PC. I'm just going to give you the way how I usually do it. So the first step is installing your CPU. Just taking the CPU and then putting it into the CPU socket and securing it with this latch over here. The next is installing the cooler onto the CPU, of course to cool it down, and this can be secured with usually 4 screws. The next is the easiest part. It's just installing the RAM and aligning this little slit right here with the opening onto the RAM slots. The next part is the I/O shield mount, and what many PC builders call the mandatory blood sacrifice, because the I/O shield is actually pretty sharp and you can cut yourself. Next is putting the motherboard into the case, where you have holes in the motherboard and you align them with the standoffs into the case and screw them down. Next, you would install the graphics card, which is this part, by inserting it into a slot into the motherboard and then securing it down with screws into the case. And then up next, you would install hard drives into the case so they can be secured, and attaching cables between the hard drive and then the motherboard. Next, you would have to install the front I/O connectors of the case into the motherboard so you can actually turn on the PC via the power button, and so you can actually use the front USB ports. And next is installing the power supply, which is just a brick with a lot of cables connected to it, as you can see. And you would have to install this into your motherboard, your graphics card, and your hard drives, and maybe additional fans if you want cooling. And that's basically all the steps until you can finally plug things into your monitor and your keyboard, and you can actually boot into Windows and install it onto your hard drives. And so, like I said, building a PC is a fairly simple process if you're able to keep up, but don't worry, even if you thought it was a little complicated, there are just so many resources online There are articles, there are books, such as John Mueller's book on how to build your own PC on a budget. You also have YouTube videos, which I personally used when I was first building a PC. And if you don't want to use any of them, you also have your friendly neighborhood PC builder, myself. Thank you.